Hello again, one last time, word lovers, as we reach the final instalment of this first series of Interesting Etymologies. And today I'll leave you with a hotch-potch, a mish-mash, and hopefully a reminder of the types of etymologies we've seen. Here are some of them in no particular order. Here's the first one, an example of a possible false etymology. Why do we say knots when measuring nautical miles at sea? I always imagined it was a shortened form of nautical miles. Now, naut comes from a word in Latin meaning connected with the sea, but if you'll pardon the pun, it's not. A knot is a knot, as in a knot in a rope. A rope which was coiled at the back of a boat and played out, at least in the 17th century, when that was the way the sailors could measure the speed of the boat. A piece of wood floated behind the boat and let the rope out knot by knot. So after a certain amount of time, they just needed to count the knots. Not that telling the time accurately was easy in a boat in the 17th century. In Greek mythology, I forgot to tell the story of Theseus entering the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur. Why would that have been important to an etymologist? Well, because he used a clue to get out. The clue was the ball of string that he lay down as he went so that he could find his way back out of the labyrinth. A clue was CLEW until sometime in the 1500s when it became CLUE as today. And as well as changing from one period to another, we have one continent to another. It's the word Fiesty, an American sounding word which did originate in the United States. Feist was a small dog, but this is very similar to Middle English expression fisting a cur, a stinking cur, that meant. And fisten was to break wind, so in fact it meant a stinking street dog. And it has to be admitted they can be quite feisty. Now, glamour and grammar possibly share a root. Grammar having been shortened from grammatica, Latin from grammatike in Greek, which probably meant the art of grammar, grammar being a letter. But I have heard from other sources that glamour came to us down from Scotland via a folk legend. Jeremy Paxman affirms this in his book The Victorians, where a midwife is summoned in the middle of the night to deliver a baby in a house she doesn't recognise, to people she doesn't know, but she has to smear an ointment into her eyes. And when she crosses the threshold, everything looks like a palace and everything goes well until it's time to go. And she accidentally wipes one of her eyes with her sleeve and sees that it hasn't been a palace at all, but it was the hovel. And the people in it were fairies. Well, that is a fairy story to beat all fairy stories. The point being that the ointment was known as glamour, and that is where we get our sense of glamour from. I like this etymology because it has a bold conjecture and also a kind of a challenge. And a quick mention for back formations, as we've seen with words such as orange. The Danish occupiers of our lands simplified the plurals into an S. Wouldn't that just be easier, make everything end in an S? With one of the consequences being that a lot of words with S's in them lost their S, as we assumed they were the plural. Pison was Greek and peas in Old English, but now peas is the plural, P is the singular. The same thing happened with cherise, turning from French cherise into a less plurally sounding English cherry. And let's revisit another favourite. The slather we found was a mowing. In our word slaughter, a mass killing was originally a mowing down. This we can go back to sla for to strike, which possibly meant someone able to strike, therefore sla becoming a sly person who could slay people with his sleight of hand. Tawdry, meaning shabby and cheap, is, again, a lot of these are, and will continue to be, supposedly from Etheldrida, who was a Northumbrian queen, and she died unfortunately of a tumour in her neck in 679. Now her name became Audrey, and people went to St Audrey's fairs and got St Audrey's lace, special neckties, which became tawdry lace, and therefore things began to be described as tawdry, but unfortunately by that time the meaning had shifted and meant any old thing you can buy at a fair. And to finish with, a couple of animals. I don't think I've hardly touched animals yet. The first one is a toponym, the Canary Islands. Everybody pictures that as the islands where the lovely yellow canaries come from, and that's in fact the case. Canaries come from the Canary Islands, but it doesn't mean the land of these birds, it means the land of the dogs. Canis, Latin. Can, even today in modern Spanish, is a high register word for dog. So it was the Isle of Dogs. And finally, another word of unknown origin, as we've seen so often, but a pretty explanation that suggests it comes from hals, meaning sea salt, keeping the prefix halo, and kion, meaning conceiving, something that would conceive, literally to swell, connected with cumulus, kion, kiein, possibly an ancient folk etymology. To explain what exactly? Well, something that conceives on sea salt, on the flat sea, those days when, well, the word is Halycon, halcyon in English, meaning a kingfisher, from the idea that the kingfisher nests on the surface of the sea when it's still enough, and can build a nest and presumably quickly rear its young there. Halcyon days indeed, as I hope these have been, as we've ploughed and trawled and frolicked through modern English to arrive at many, many surprising points.